There is a specific kind of person who owns 3 unopened notebooks, 4 unused candles still in their packaging, a set of fine china that has never touched a meal, and a collection of pens so carefully preserved that the ink inside them has begun to dry. They are not careless with these things. In fact, they are almost reverently careful. They move around these objects the way you might move around something sacred, something too important for an ordinary Tuesday, something being held in reserve for a moment that is, somehow, always just ahead. You may know this person. You may live with this person. Or, if you are being quietly honest with yourself right now, you may be this person. But this isn't really about the objects. It never was. What we are actually talking about is one of the most quietly revealing patterns in human psychology, a pattern that sits at the intersection of identity, fear, and the way we construct meaning out of the materials of our lives. Because the person who saves everything and uses nothing is not simply indecisive or sentimental or wasteful in reverse. They are doing something far more complex than hoarding. They are building a future that they are simultaneously terrified to enter. Consider what it means to save something. On the surface, it looks like prudence, like wisdom, like the kind of forward thinking that separates the prepared from the careless. But when saving becomes a permanent state, when the beautiful journal never receives a single word, when the expensive perfume outlives 3 relationships without ever being worn on a meaningful night, something else is operating beneath the surface. Psychologists call this a form of self-handicapping, a subtle but powerful mechanism in which a person protects their sense of self by never fully committing to an outcome. Because if you never use the good notebook, you never risk writing something unworthy of it. If you never open the wine you've been saving for a special occasion, you never have to confront the possibility that no occasion was ever quite special enough. The logic is airtight and almost entirely unconscious. There is a concept in psychology called the internal locus of control, the degree to which a person believes their own actions are the primary force shaping their life. People with a strong internal locus act on the world directly. They use the nice dishes on a random Wednesday because they understand, on some cellular level, that they are the ones who decide when something is worthy of being celebrated. But the person who saves everything tends to have displaced that control outward. They are waiting for life to signal permission, waiting for the moment that is objectively, undeniably, unmistakably deserving. And because no such signal ever arrives in the form they are imagining, the notebook stays clean, and the candles remain unlit, and everything continues to be preserved in a kind of amber that looks like care but functions like paralysis. There is almost always a story behind this pattern. There usually is, when the pattern runs this deep. Many people who save things compulsively grew up in environments where resources were scarce, not always materially, but emotionally, where good things were rare enough that you learned without anyone having to teach you that you should be careful with them, that you should ration them. That abundance, when it arrived, was fragile and temporary, and best protected by not touching it too readily. And so the behavior that once made perfect sense, saving the good soap for guests, wearing the school shoes only on school days, becomes a philosophy that follows you into adulthood long after the scarcity that created it has ended. The soap is still being saved. The guests are still being anticipated. And you are still living, in some private corner of yourself, in a world where good things must be earned before they can be experienced. There is grief in that, if you look at it directly, because what these objects often represent is not luxury or sentimentality or even practicality. What they represent is possibility. The unused journal is not just a journal. It is the version of you who writes beautifully in it. The unworn dress is not just fabric. It is an evening radiant enough to deserve it. And as long as these things remain untouched, that version of you remains intact, potential, unruined, preserved in the same amber as everything else. To use the thing would be to test the version of yourself that owns it. And testing, as anyone who has been afraid of failing will tell you, is the most vulnerable act there is. This is what psychologists sometimes describe as identity preservation through inaction, the quiet strategy of keeping your most cherished self-images safe by never fully putting them to the test. It is not laziness. It is not ingratitude. It is a form of love, misapplied, Love for a self that you are protecting so carefully from disappointment that you are also protecting it from life. The cruelest irony of this pattern is that it tends to produce the very emptiness it was designed to prevent. The person who saves the candles for a special occasion often arrives at the end of years to find they have lived mostly in the dark, not because the occasion never came, but because the occasion was always, quietly, right now. And they kept looking past it towards some better, brighter, more deserving version of the present that never quite materialized. And yet, there is something worth honoring in this impulse, even while we examine it clearly. The person who saves everything is, at their core, someone who believes in a life worth rising to, someone who has not yet given up on the idea that their life contains moments deserving of the finest things they own. That is not a small thing. The cynic uses everything carelessly and calls it freedom. The person who saves too carefully is, in their own complicated way, still a believer, still holding space for a version of their life that feels worthy of their own tenderness. The work is not to stop believing in that life. The work is to understand that you do not have to wait for it to arrive, that the ordinary evening you are sitting in right now, unremarkable, slightly tired, nothing particularly special on the calendar, is not the waiting room. It is the room. The good china is not waiting for a guest more important than you. The notebook is not waiting for a thought more worthy than the one forming in your mind at this exact moment. And the life you have been saving your best things for? It has been happening all along, in the spaces between the occasions you were waiting for. So, here is the question worth sitting with tonight, perhaps over something you have been saving for too long. What would it mean to decide, starting now, that the life you are already living is the one you were saving everything for? And what would you finally allow yourself to use? If something here stayed with you, subscribe and like the video, because the next idea might be the one you've been saving yourself for.